About 2 days ago, I was walking up the steps of the Capitol when Representative Yoho suddenly turned a corner, and he was accompanied by Representative Roger Williams, and accosted me on the steps right here in front of our nation's Capitol. I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind. And he called me dangerous. And then he took a few more steps, and after I had recognized his comments as rude, he walked away and said, "I'm rude. You're calling me rude." I took a few steps ahead, and I walked inside and cast my vote, because my constituents send me here each and every day to fight for them and to make sure that they are able to keep a roof over their head, that they're able to feed their families, and that they're able to carry their lives with dignity. I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol, and in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, "These are the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman, the congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th congressional district, but every congresswoman and every woman in this country, because all of us have had to deal with this in some form, some way, some shape, at some point in our lives." And I want to be clear that Representative Yoho's comments were not deeply hurtful or piercing to me, because I have worked a working class job. I have waited tables in restaurants. I have ridden the subway. I have walked the streets in New York City. And this kind of language is not new. I have encountered words uttered by Mr. Yoho and men uttering the same words as Mr. Yoho while I was being harassed in restaurants. I have tossed men out of bars that have used language like Mr. Yoho's. And I have encountered this type of harassment riding the subway in New York City. This is not new. And that is the problem. Mr. Yoho was not alone. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with Representative Roger Williams. And that's when we start to see that this issue is not about one incident. It is cultural. It is a culture of lack of impunity, of accepting of violence and violent language against women, and an entire structure of power that supports that. Because not only have I been spoken to disrespectfully, particularly by members of the Republican Party and elected officials in the Republican Party, not just here, but the President of the United States last year told me to go home to another country, with the implication that I don't even belong in America. The governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, before I even was sworn in, called me a whatever that is. Dehumanizing language is not new. And what we are seeing is that incidents like these are happening in a pattern. This is a pattern of an attitude towards women and dehumanization of others.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been serving in this body just under 3 years. In that 3 years, an enormous amount has happened. But in response to the Republican leader's remarks when he says that this action is unprecedented, what I believe is unprecedented is for a member of House leadership of either party to be unable to condemn incitement of violence against a member of this body. It is sad. It is a sad day in which a member who leads a political party in the United States of America cannot bring themselves to say issuing a depiction of murdering a member of Congress is wrong, and instead decides to venture off into a tangent about gas prices and inflation. What is so hard? What is so hard about saying that this is wrong? This is not about me. This is not about Representative Gosar, but this is about what we are willing to accept. Not just the Republican leader, but I have seen other members of this party advance the argument, including Representative Gosar himself, the illusion that this was just a joke. That what we say and what we do does not matter so long as we claim a lack of meaning. Now, this nihilism runs deep, and it conveys and betrays a certain contempt for the meaning and importance of our work here. That what we do, so long as we claim that it is a joke, doesn't matter. That what we say here doesn't matter. That our actions every day as elected leaders in the United States of America doesn't matter. That this chamber and what happens in it doesn't matter. And I am here to rise to say that it does. Our work here matters. Our example matters. There is meaning in our service. And as leaders in this country, when we incite violence with depictions against our colleagues, that trickles down into violence in this country. And that is where we must draw the line, independent of party, identity, or belief. It is about a core recognition of human dignity and value and worth. So when we talk about, as mentioned in the resolution, that these depictions are part of a larger trend of misogyny and racial misogyny, racist misogyny, this has results in dampening the participation. And so this vote is not as complex as perhaps the Republican leader would like to make folks believe. It's pretty cut and dry. Does anyone in this chamber find this behavior acceptable? Would you allow depictions of violence against women, against colleagues? Would you allow that in your home? Do you think this should happen on a school board? In a city council? In a church? And if it's not acceptable there, why should it be accepted here? Lastly, when the Republican leader rose to talk about how there are all of these double standards and lists a litany of all these different things, not once did he list an example of a member of Congress threatening the life of another. This is not about a double standard, and what is unprecedented and what is tragic is the descent of transgression in this body. I grew up as a little girl with awe about our nation's capital. The reverence and the importance and the gravity of our work here.
Additional 30 seconds.
Generally is recognized.
The gravity of our work here. So the question that I pose to this body in response is, will we live up to the promises that we make our children? That this is a place where we will defend one another regardless of belief. That our core human dignity matters. If you believe that this behavior is acceptable, go ahead. Vote no.
But if you believe that this behavior should not be accepted, then vote yes. It's really that simple. Thank you, and I yield back to the chairman.
Mr.
Chairman, and thank you all as our panelists here for lending your expertise and your insight to help us better legislate, and especially thank you to Dr. Georges for, as a professor at Lehman College, for representing the Bronx so well here in this body. I have a question. I wanted to continue a little bit on my colleague from California's line of questioning about public investment in research and development. I guess you would say that this is, would it be correct, Dr. Kesselheim, to characterize the NIH money that is being used in development and research as an early investment?
Yes.
So the public is acting as an early investor in the production of these drugs. Is the public receiving any sort of direct return on that investment from the highly profitable drugs that are developed from that research?
No, in most cases, there isn't. When those products are eventually handed off to a for-profit company, there aren't licensing deals that bring money back into the coffers of the NIH. That usually doesn't happen.
So the public is acting as an early investor, putting tons of money in the development of drugs that then become privatized, and then they receive no return on the investment that they have made.
Right.
Dr. Anderson, I have a question. Since you study comparative insurance systems, are there models where the public does receive returns on investments in other insurance models across the world?
There are a few, but they're relatively uncommon.
Mm-hmm. And how does that tend to work?
So essentially, if the places at the UK or someplace like that have invested money in it, they will get some rate of return on those investments. But that, again, it's relatively uncommon.
Mm-hmm. I also have one question for Dr. Georges, and please stop me if I'm going out of the scope of your expertise. As a nurse, in your experience as a nurse, do you have knowledge of the VA, like in general knowledge of the VA and how the VA works?
Some knowledge.
And in your experience, is the VA as a public-owned and operated operation, rather, are the drug prices in the VA lower or higher or the same?
Well, that I
as what
can't
we see in
speak to. I
general?
don't have that kind
So-
of knowledge.
They tend to be much lower
So
than in other places in the
So they
about,
tend-
about 31% lower than what Medicare pays.
So the VA tends to be lower. And can you explain why, anyone on the panel, why that is?
So, well, in part because the VA gets some automatic statutory rebates based on the drugs that it buys, but also because the VA negotiates on behalf of all of the members of the VA and is able to use its marketing power to try to negotiate that. And also because it takes a very thoughtful approach to developing its formulary and can use inclusion on its formulary as another way of trying to negotiate a fair price for the product.
So you would say, and am I correct in saying that the VA is using collective bargaining power in the market to lower the price of drugs as a counter to some of the for-profit or profit motive pressures, upward pressures on the cost of pharmaceuticals?
Right. Yes.
Okay, great. And I guess one last question in my remaining time. If you all could ask us, to act as members of Congress and do one thing, one action, what would that action be?
So I think, for me, it's external reference prices. And that's something that President Trump has proposed in Medicare Part B, to pay 126% of what the other countries do. I'm not sure I would agree with the countries that he chose, but essentially to pay 123%. If right now in the Medicare Part D, which is most of the money, we pay about 3 to 4 times what other countries pay for the same drugs. I don't think we can bring it down to what they pay or 126% of it, but we could bring it down a lot.
I tend to think external reference pricing is not a good idea, and I think that what we should do is actually get our own house in order and negotiate and try to evaluate the value and comparative and cost effectiveness of drugs better in the U.S. and try to determine what the right price is for U.S. patients rather than relying on what the prices are in other countries. But if I could say one thing that we could do, I think it would be to, again, try to develop a system where the government could try to identify what the fair price is for a drug and what are reasonable prices for the drug based on the value that the drug provides to patients, and then use that to negotiate with the pharmaceutical manufacturer to try to get a more effective price that we provide.
We in AARP would like you to have HHS be allowed to negotiate lower drug prices on behalf of Medicare beneficiaries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Now,
very
when we
much.
talk about the concern of the environment as an elitist concern, 1 year ago, I was waitressing in a taco shop in downtown Manhattan. I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. Tell that to the families in Flint, whose kids have their blood is ascending in lead levels. Their brains are damaged for the rest of their lives. Call them elitist. You're telling them that those kids are trying to get on a plane to Davos? People are dying. They are dying. And the response across the other side of the aisle is to introduce an amendment 5 minutes before a hearing in a markup. This is serious. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about our constituents in all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now, underwater. Farms, towns that will never be recovered and never come back. And we're here, and people are more concerned about helping oil companies than helping their own families? I don't think so. I don't think so. This is about our lives. This is about American lives. And it should not be partisan. Science should not be partisan. We are facing a national crisis. And if we do not ascend to that crisis, if we do not ascend to the levels in which we were threatened at the Great Depression, when we were threatened in World War II, if we do not ascend to those levels, if we tell the American public that we are more willing to invest and bail out big banks than we are willing to invest in our farmers and our urban families, then I don't know what we're here doing. I don't know what we're here doing.